Right, it is now time for our future politics panel. Joining me as ever, I've got Jonathan Gibson and Reem Ibrahim, both who are political commentators and very sensible people indeed. Good morning.
Good morning.
Very good to see you. Now, so I was just saying to you, Reem, was it last week when Liz Truss was Prime Minister? And the answer is no, it was Thursday, wasn't it?
It was Thursday. I cannot believe that she resigned only on Thursday. It feels like it's been going on for so long now. We've got yet another Conservative leadership election.
I know, so the lettuce won.
The lettuce did win. Yes, I was quite surprised. I thought she'd be able to drag it out a little bit longer, but no, lettuce won, and Liz Truss only lasted about 45 days, was it?
Yeah, 44, wasn't it?
44, was it?
It was left with the Queen and everything happening. She only actually served for sort of 12 days. The Conservative leadership election went on for longer than she was in her role.
But that's a brilliant point, you see, because I thought that I know it was terribly sad, of course, the death of the monarch, but I thought it would give her time to think things through, to get matters in place, then deliver everything beautifully and in a choreographed way, and of course that was not to be.
No, it all completely went wrong in some way.
They did sort of like drop the mini budget and then run away. They didn't explain anything. They didn't really sort of explain why they were doing those tax cutting policies, and I think people sort of thought they were more radical than they were. I mean, the sort of reversal in corporation tax and sort of the reversal of national insurance, those really weren't that radical, but there was no OBR forecast, and it was all being funded through borrowing, and that was the primary issue. So now we've got yet again another leadership election.
And then Jeremy Hunt comes in, obviously, and then tears up everything. So essentially everything the members voted for, he's now torn up. So we're back to square one. And then when you look at the polls, and I'm saying this to you, obviously, in an advisory way, the support for the Conservatives is now at its lowest level in polling history. So Conservatives at 14%. I mean, that is extraordinary. And I'm just beginning to wonder, the infighting, the backbiting, these rival camps briefing against each other, I think they could be toast.
I do think they could be. I think it's sort of, when we're looking at the Conservative Party throughout the leadership election over the summer, there were two very different definitions of what conservatism is, right? We had Rishi Sunak, sort of the high-tax conservative, maybe sort
That's
of...
not conservative.
It's not conservative at all, you're absolutely right. Rishi Sunak represented a continuation of the status quo, and he still does, in my view. Then you had Liz Truss, who tried to give us something a little bit different. She represented the sort of free market economics, sort of market liberal, that sort of idea that the government can do more harm than good, so we should reduce the size of the state, let people have more of their own money in their own pockets. That sort of really sort of small state libertarian, if you will, idea. And the party members wanted what Liz Truss said. I think there's a huge disconnect between Tory MPs and party members.
100%.
Tory MPs are way more left-wing than the party members. They sort of wanted that Rishi Sunak, and they wanted Rishi, and they didn't let Liz Truss have a chance to win or succeed, and they forced it through. So now they're probably going to get what they wanted.
So I have been thinking, is there a skullduggery at work here?
I think the characterisation of Rishi Sunak, firstly, as a high-tax Conservative isn't quite fair, given the fact that I think he promised that, for now, during the inflationary crisis and the cost of living crisis, he would keep taxes high, but he said in the future he wants to cut taxes. So I don't think he's, a left-wing politician by any means to start with.
Yeah.
I think there is really a divide, clearly, between the membership and the Tory MPs, and you still see this, like in other parties as well. It's not restricted to the Conservative Party in terms of this disconnect, and it causes a lot of problems, It's clearly caused a problem.
Massive problems. So I interviewed Tobias Elwood the other day, and Tobias basically said, that's where we went wrong. We asked the members. We should never ask the members. My jaw hit the floor. And we played that clip out yesterday. Yeah. But it was extraordinary. And then he really lost his temper, because I think he realised, or at least what I got from that, was that many of these members of Parliament are literally fighting for their political lives.
Yeah. Didn't he also say that the free market experiment is dead?
Yes,
what
he
is
did.
the Conservative Party without free market?
He tweeted that, and then the tweet was deleted. I've still got it.
I screenshotted it as well. I think it's ridiculous. I mean, there really is an existential crisis for the Conservative Party. It's sort of, where do we stand on these key economic issues? In my view, I think the Johnsonite sort of economics belongs in the Labour Party. This is not conservatism. We've got to believe in the free market and believe in people, because the people make up the market.
So now what happens from here, Jonathan?
Well,
So hang on a minute. We've got Penny Mordaunt. So she has declared. So apparently she's on 27, although no one really knows, but 27. Then we've got Boris and Rishi, both undeclared. I think still. I'm just watching the screens up there just to tell me whether they have declared. But they still haven't declared. We believe that both Boris and Rishi are over 100, and I've heard that from multiple sources.
Yeah, so I think it's quite worrying because you could have this massive factionalism. And what Rishi has done, to be fair, quite successfully, is actually got members from all sides of the political spectrum of his party to support him, you know. Kemi Badenoch had a really fascinating speech she came out with as to why she was endorsing Rishi. He's got people on the right of the party, people more on the centre of the party. So he is trying to create some sort of coalition across the party. But there's still clearly a split, you know. Nadine Dorries, Jacob Rees-Mogg, ardent backers, you know. What was their slogan? Boris or bust. And I think unless they come together and work out some sort of political solution, there's going to be massive infighting for the next couple of years, and the Conservative Party are really going to hit the floor.
The one I found most interesting was Lord Frost, of course, a big Boris backer, now actually backing Rishi Sunak. What's behind that?
I have no idea. I think it's sort of that because he initially supported Liz Truss, I believe, over the Liz election. So I think it's this sort of idea that the Conservative Party don't really know what direction we're going in. I think that when you look at the Labour Party, there's always been that left, centre-left division, whereas the Conservative Party have always been that broad church and usually always been able to coalesce with one another. So I think it's quite interesting how the division is sort of completely right through.
No, I've got to say I completely disagree with you there. I think Labour has massively changed from being a Corbynite regime to being a Keir Starmer regime. They're completely different. Just as the Conservative Party, I think it's not fair to characterise centre-right people as leftists. I just don't think it's fair. You can still say they're not as hard right as certain people, but they're not on the left. And in terms of the endorsements of Rishi and Liz, just remember part of that has come down to the fact that it was a vote from the membership, and a lot of the MPs saw that Liz was going to win. It was obvious for weeks, we remember discussing it. We knew Liz was going to win.
We spoke about it for weeks.
We spoke about it. And so a lot of them shifted from supporting Rishi to supporting Liz, and several of them are now going back and supporting Rishi.
But the bigger problem I have with this, we talked about it for weeks. It was incredibly self-indulgent. They took their eye off the ball. They then finally got a Prime Minister, and now they've got rid of the Prime Minister. Why did we bother?
And why are we doing it now within a week? I mean, why didn't we do it within a week the last time around?
Well,
why
that's
did it take 8 weeks last time?
Well, that's a very good question.
If we could do it within the week's time, I don't know why we didn't. I mean, we are still in the middle of a cost of living crisis. We've got a really difficult winter ahead of us, and we're all still playing politics.
There's a great line. I mean, you're right about that, but also GCHQ, if you remember, actually warned and said that electronic voting wasn't fit for purpose, and they thought it would be possibly that certain foreign powers could interfere, and yet it's being used now. But I don't think the safeguarding is there, so that concerns me.
I think it is definitely quite concerning, especially when we're thinking about the sort of way that global politics is at the moment. We've got, the Russia-Ukraine crisis. We've got our Chinese I would say friends, enemies overseas, sort of. So we've got a lot of security risks globally, and I think that there is a lot of those security risks that we see within elections. I mean, we know for a fact that foreign powers did meddle in 2019. It wasn't enough to change any electoral outcomes, but it's really something to worry about, especially when we're looking at party members. Such a small amount of people. Actually, the vote could go either way, and it really is a risk.
Very interestingly, thank you to Mr. Watchman's Not Wrong. He has sent the post that Tobias Ellwood did, and the post actually read: "The free market experiment is over. It's been a low point in our party's great history." Chilling words, these. The reset begins.
What is that?
Well, I think that is deeply worrying. Time for centrist, stable, fiscally responsible government offering credible domestic and international leadership. I'm honoured to be the 100th Tory MP to support Rishi Sunak.
That makes me so angry. What is the Conservative Party if not the party of free market economics? Tobias Ellwood belongs in the Labour Party. I hope he defects, because people like that do not belong in the Conservative Party. That's not Conservative.
I don't think you can say the Conservative Party is purely the market of absolute free market with no government intervention, The Conservative Party haven't scrapped all taxes, have they? And I don't think anyone... I don't think anyone...
Been Conservative,
no, and you can say I don't think there should be, as high a tax burden. You can say you want a reversal of the national insurance hike. You can say all of these things. No one's going to say, I know you're much more to the right in terms of economically than myself, but you're not going to say every single tax should be scrapped. And at some point, it's always a balancing game, How much should we have? How much should we not have? And the point Rishi was trying to make is you can't have a Bank of England facing off against the Tories, the government, You can't have
They've got to work together.
They've got to work together,
yeah.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, obviously, they should have had an OBR report, and the OBR actually said, we will look at your fiscal plans. Now, had the OBR said this is achievable, that would have been a whole different different ball game, wouldn't it?
Definitely, and I think that Liz Truss's issue was that she was trying to have the best of both worlds. She was trying to cut taxes, which is what people like, but also unequivocally refused to cut spending. And that's really the issue, because we're already spending a lot more because of the energy price package. You've got huge amounts of spending on welfare benefits, and you can argue that those things are right, but then if you're cutting taxes, you've got to cut spending. Instead, she decided to fund it through further borrowing.
More borrowing.
We're now £2.4 trillion in debt, and who's going to be paying for it?
Well,
It's us,
it'll be
the
you and me
taxpayers.
again.
Yeah.
But again, you see, everyone seems to have forgotten they've been in power for 12 years, so you can't then say we have a massive new sort of government coming in and we're going to right all the wrongs, because it was you lot in the first place. But just in terms of where we are, and this is what I'm really struggling with, we've had Conservative Party, since I've seen you, by the way, Conservative Party members ripping up their Conservative membership cards. I've had them videoed and sent back to me. They've been joining other parties. I know that other parties...
Reform UK?
And amongst others. And their websites have crashed from the traffic that is now going towards them. Do you think... I mean, I don't know, but I get a sense something very strange is happening in British politics right now. I think this is something unlike something I've ever seen.
Yeah, I think this could definitely be a turning point in British politics, a really monumental shift from the status quo, from traditional conservatism, which has had a broad coalition, which has been incredibly successful. Staying in power for 12 years is no mean feat, when they're a really, really effective party.
Indeed.
To do that, you have to be incredibly politically skilled and accomplished.
And ruthless.
Look at the majority. Look at the majority that Boris Johnson won. It was staggering. And I think from that point to the point we're at now, looking at the polls, something massive has to have happened, and it has happened, and that shift is colossal, and it's going to have a lasting impact. It's not going to just be something really, really small. There have been so many factors at play which have changed the way that voters, the way that their members, and the way that their MPs have all thought and made every single one of them angry in some sense in the last few months. Nobody in the Conservative Party is sitting back, resting on their laurels right now. They're all tense, they're all nervous, they're all anxious for the future of their party, and that is incredibly significant.
They should be. But I mean, look at the headlines this morning. Just, we've got this. Now, what's this about? So, deal or no deal, the idea that Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak have been meeting. What's going on there?
So the question is, nobody really knows. What said, they haven't reported anything. Clearly, two different sources have reported, at least to the BBC, that they've been meeting. It's almost certain, but nobody really knows. Potentially, they're trying to form some sort of agreement to prevent this massive divide between the Boris faction and the Rishi faction within the party, because that would again be disastrous. We saw the
They're in the same
impact.
faction,
Exactly.
in my view. They're both on the left of the party.
But they're not, because they're vying for political leadership. Rishi brought down Boris's government. Clearly, they're very opposed to one another.
What about the idea of Rishi being Prime Minister and Boris being Foreign Secretary?
His ego would not allow that.
I agree with that.
I do not think he would be if he's not Prime Minister, he's out of Parliament.
But there's also a lovely article in the Telegraph today saying Boris Johnson is like a boulder and basically sitting there, and it's a boulder on the edge of a cliff, and you just can't take your eyes off the boulder. And rightly it says no one else can sit on a beach looking at their toes and cause the whole political world to run around him. He doesn't organise the theatre comes to him. And we saw that. He flew back in. I've never seen such a much-tracked plane, and indeed then having live broadcast pictures of him in economy in a woolly hat.
I think that's quite right. People seem to quite like him. I think if I was a Tory MP, and we all know I really despise Boris Johnson because of his economic policy, and I think the last 3 years has been a complete waste. We won the 80-seat majority, but we've actually done nothing good with it. We were betrayed on Brexit. We were betrayed on many of these economic issues. Highest tax burden in 70 years. However, he is an election winner, and if I was a Tory MP thinking I want to keep my job in the next 2 years, you'd probably think that Boris was your best bet.
So what about this? I was talking to Emma Wolfe earlier, and she said if Boris came back, so obviously the Tories are in big trouble. If Boris came back, and that's what the members want, do you think that Boris could call everyone's bluff, have a general election, and just scrape it, Jonathan?
No, I don't think he could. I really don't think the Conservatives are in a position to win. Even among his own MPs, remember, 68, I think it was, that resigned around him.
68,
It's huge. Among the electorate, among many polls which have been done among Tory voters, this isn't Tory members, it's a distinctly different group. They're more pro-Rishi slightly by a marginal amount than Boris. I think Boris certainly has the charisma, he has the personality, he has a bit of support that will bring him some good, but I just don't think he could easily win an election.
You see, the frustration is, if it is Boris and Rishi in that final 2 again, what are we doing? You know, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result.
Exactly, and we're not exactly sport for choice as party members, are we? I mean, we've got, this is why I said they're in the same faction of the party. We've got Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak, who are both representations of that continuation of the status quo. They're both high-tax Conservatives. They both, they were residing over the economy for the past 3 years. We're now in £2.4 trillion of government debt. We've got debt up to our eyeballs, and it's their fault. And we're choosing between the two people that caused it.
I know.
But it's not their fault, because Rishi Sunak's the one who didn't want to borrow tons of money to pay to fuel.
Well, he was the Chancellor, so why didn't he?
They did furlough, but that was because of COVID. The high tax burdens, the high tax burdens were a result of policy and situations that happened which were unprecedented in many ways. And we can argue specifically about whether those policies were most effective. I think the 12 billion on track and trace was a complete waste of money. I think everyone would agree.
But also, I think the lockdowns, the subsequent lockdowns, were ridiculous. We didn't need them. But I mean, hindsight is a great thing. I do understand that. Just in terms of where we go now, because obviously this is now a really very much a live issue. I just don't know how they get around this and how they square it. What's your feeling? Do you think they'll come up with a compromise between the two of them, or will they declare? And if they do declare, who's going to win?
So I think if they declare, then Boris Johnson will win. I think he's more popular among the Conservative members.
It's extraordinary.
Which is really interesting. I think if they don't declare and they manage to form some sort of agreement within the Tory actual MPs, Rishi Sunak is clearly far more popular, and I think they might be able to come to some kind of agreement which doesn't completely break up the Tory party and allows Rishi to become Prime Minister. How they do that, I'm not quite sure, but I think that's what needs to happen if the Conservative Party want to stay alive and kicking.
OK, so then let's say that Boris does become Crown King again. King Boris, he'll love that, won't he? I mean, extraordinary times. But if he does, and then, of course, we've got the privileges investigation. Now, clearly, that hasn't even started. It starts next month. In terms of that, if they find against him, and now, actually, they're now spinning the line, Number 10 is spinning the line, saying that, actually, they need the right of reply, they need to cross-question the witnesses and so on to ensure the fair trial.
It's criminal charges we're thinking about, right?
Indeed.
That will, if Johnson wins the leadership election this week, and we see him get back into Number 10, and then he's faced with criminal charges, that is the end of the Conservative Party as we know it.
Yes, so what happens then if they find him guilty? Then he will be forced to stand down. There could be a by-election.
That's it.
Then what happens?
The party's gone.
Then the party's gone.
Yeah. The party is... You cannot have a Prime Minister that faces criminal charges and carries on, and you cannot have a third, leadership election. It gets ridiculous.
In 1 year.
Yeah.
No.
Last time it was basically I'm a celebrity, get me out of here, going on for 7 weeks. We cannot have this on repeat. It just turns into a complete farce.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. I think it's a really sad state of affairs, actually, for a once great party. I mean, it's interesting. Loads and loads of messages coming in. Hi, David and team. Read your comments about self-indulgent twerks merry-go-round. Get rid of the whole lot of them. I couldn't agree more. Listening to people in the real world, everyone absolutely agrees. It's been publicly evidenced that 650 politicians, I like that, and the politically ingratiating departments are the worst performing of all the jobs. The rest of the country works hard and gets punished for underperforming. These politicians or pollutants need a serious up-to-date reality check, attitude adjustment in terms of employment contracts rewritten to be representative of current-day conditions that everyone else who is productive has to comply to, and it goes on and on. But the point is, actually, I watched some of my friends who are members of Parliament indulged in this backbiting and fighting, but of course they have income and they can afford to drag this out. Most of us can't do that. We have to work.
Absolutely, and it's horrible to see this sort of infighting at a point where we're facing a cost of living crisis. People are feeling completely ignored. The attention's all about who's going to be the next PM, not about how they're going to heat their bills or put food on the table. It's completely diversionary focus that the country's eyes are on right now, rather than the really important issues which are affecting people. And this is horrible to see. It's really, really nasty at a time when we need to support these people.
And the impact on small businesses, I think, is really quite underestimated. So, we've talked about the fiscal policy and the markets. I think when we talk about the markets and the market reaction, it sort of feels quite far removed from ourselves. But actually, the smaller businesses that were probably hoping for that 6% reversal in corporation tax, they now have less of their own money. These smaller businesses that were barely surviving throughout COVID, hardly surviving throughout this cost of living crisis. They're now facing this really sort of awful time where they've been just sort of completely messed around by the government on fiscal policy. There is no clear direction. I think that when we talk about the markets, we've got to remember the markets are people, and this is really small businesses that are facing these really awful times.
But you see, when you talk to small businesses, I own one, many of them, including mine, took bounce back loans. They have no idea how they're going to pay those bounce back loans because of course they didn't trade during that time. And now, of course, their costs are going through the roof, like pubs, for example. We'll lose pubs, we'll lose those pillar stones, those cornerstones of our fabric of society. And I think we're in big trouble if we don't do something and do it quickly.
Yeah, it's really, really worrying situation. Even with the energy price cap, the energy bills have more than doubled, and that's with this £60 billion.
I got the most incredible energy bill the other day and nearly gave me a heart attack.
I'm sure. I think most people just don't want to look at it.
No, I'm not going to open anymore. That's it. Yeah. I mean, it is extraordinary. And of course, you see, the energy price cap doesn't cap your energy at 2,500. It's the unit price that's capped. And so therefore, and they are very clever in the way they've worded that by saying that's the average amount you should expect to pay.
Yes.
Which means, the reading between the lines means you're going to pay a lot more than that. But just in terms of how this happens, I just don't see how they get out of this one.
The Conservative Party really need to be really cautious and not doing what happened last time. Liz Truss promised everything everyone wanted to hear. As you said before, she promised not to cut spending and to cut taxes and to borrow to do that, and we saw every time she opened her mouth the markets went down, the pound went down. It's really, really worrying. Going on holiday is going to be completely ridiculous. Can't even think about it looking at where the pound is at.
No, and I think just before holiday, of course, we have to get through the winter.
Yeah,
and of course
the winter is just
and the cost of energy.
Which is going to be awful. I mean, I think that what we saw with the leadership election over the summer with Liz Truss, that she gave us this definition of conservatism that we've been hoping for so long, because the Conservative Party haven't been Conservative for such a long time. Liz Truss, I think, represented a new direction in the party, and I think that it was a huge blunder the way that she pushed forward this mini budget, dropped it, and then dropped like a bomb, and then ran off without explaining why they were doing these tax cuts, why people need more of their own money in their own pockets. There was no sort of explanation behind it, and that's what the sort of borrowing is really what spooked the market.
But there's every time as soon as she launched a mini budget, and as soon as she opened her mouth, every single time the markets went down,
Because it was unfunded. It was funded through borrowing.
It was unfunded. The budget was
no
ridiculous.
OBR forecast.
Let's just go back to where we are now. I was sent a letter late last night, actually, very late last night, by the former presidents of the National Conservative Convention and members of the Conservative Party board. I happen to know a few of those people on this. This is very damning indeed. It goes on to say, we need a leader who can steady the ship and unite the party and re-engage with the country and electorate. We recognise the success of Boris Johnson, a proven political leader, a man who smashed the Red Wall and delivered an 80-seat majority against the odds, admired and respected by many. However, now is not the time to find out if the country will accept a Prime Minister who so recently was removed from office. The first Prime Minister to have broken the law in office. He has an important role to play in the future, but it is not as Prime Minister today.
Yeah, it's so easy right now with all the absolute disasters.
I mean, that's incredible, and this is from the party board.
You've got friends in high places, David.
You should know that to be true, yes.
It's very easy right now, I think, with everything that's gone on in the last few months, to sort of ignore all the scandals that were facing Boris before, whether it was Owen Paterson, Matt Hancock, the Partygate scandal. I remember the first week I came on was the Pincher scandal.
That's right.
That was huge, and that was inevitably what set off the string of later failures. It's really easy to forget about those and say, think back to 2019 when he won that stomping majority and when he, got Brexit done, you could say, or,
No, not.
He didn't get it done.
That's the key, because he won it. I think people sort of talk about Boris Johnson as being this incredibly charismatic, untouchable politician, but he won the election. The Red Wall seats, they lended Boris their vote because they thought that he was going to get Brexit done in the way that they wanted. I think we're completely betrayed on Brexit. It's unfinished. You're still, the Northern Ireland Protocol, the issue around the ECHR, the issue around Brexit, it's unfinished. We're still so deeply connected institutionally to the European Union, and whether whatever you think about Brexit or not, that's completely fine. But it was the democratic will of the people, and it's not been finished.
And my biggest worry is that if you have all these Remainers back in number 10, we'll be back in the EU before you can say next Christmas. And that is something I never want to see. I'll have to be an MEP again. And I really don't want to do that.
Oh, my God.
Yes, exactly. Thank you very much, both of you, for coming in. Jonathan Gibson and Reem Ibrahim, both political commentators.